Imagine a piece of Star Wars content so bad that George Lucas himself cannot abolish it from the face of the planet. This is the holiday special. He was ready to physically destroy every single copy he could get his hands on, and now, in the age of digital media, it is quite literally impossible to abolish the Star Wars holiday special from existence. This single piece of Star Wars is by far George Lucas's biggest regret in his career, and it overnight became the bane of his existence.
I'm retired!
And it only exists today for us to watch because a couple of people recorded it when it aired that fateful night of November 17th, 1978. Without those bootleg copies, there would be no Star Wars holiday special, there would be no Life Day, no Boba Fett being introduced for the first time, and we wouldn't have gotten this entire cartoon that is actually the best part. I want to go on and list more good things that we would be without if no copies of it existed and it was just merely a legend our parents talked about, as if it was some ethereal experience we would never understand. But honestly, I can't think of any more good things from the actual special itself. Honestly, I think the best part is that it's become this thing that has been so coveted and sought after back in the day. While we can watch it today as a joke and put it on at Christmas to have a laugh at how bad it is, it wasn't always like that. Before the age of digital availability and us literally being able to watch the full special on YouTube because neither Disney nor Lucas wants to copyright strike it and claim responsibility for this mess, back when it came out, it was actually quite hard to come across. It only ever aired on television once, so if you weren't plopped down in front of the TV waiting for it to come on, you never saw it again. That is, unless your cousin's friend's mom decided to record it just because it was Star Wars, and then there was just a sliver of a chance you might be able to track it down and finally watch it. It's crazy to think that after the first Star Wars movie exploded and became the phenomenon that everyone was going crazy over, this, the holiday special, is the next Star Wars thing they got. That's wild. Now, originally George Lucas had this plan to re-release his first movie, THX, back into theaters later the same year to piggyback off of the success of Star Wars. But the president of Warner Brothers at the time shut him down. He shut Lucas down really hard and told him in a few months people will have completely forgot about him and Star Wars. And I think this is where Lucas had this worry born, or at least this is where it was validated in real life in the industry for him, that fans could very possibly forget about Star Wars. He was worried to some extent that between the release of the first movie and The Empire Strikes Back, that people would forget about it or lose excitement enough to kill the franchise at the second movie and halt merchandise sales almost entirely. And the merchandise was the one thing that Lucas didn't play around with. He completely revolutionized the way merchandise is tied into media, and because of this fear of his, he had to figure out some way of keeping Star Wars fresh in everybody's heads until he could release the next film, which was still in pre-production at the time. Because he still had 2 more movies to make. He needed the fans to care long enough for him to finish The Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. And chances were, if he could keep them excited and waiting until Empire came out, he'd have them hooked enough to finish his trilogy. So all he needed to do was keep everyone thinking about Star Wars from the summer of 1977 up until the release of Empire, which would be May 1980. But that's 3 full years later, which is quite a lot of time for how fast Hollywood moves. So George thought, what better way to give people more Star Wars to keep them excited about this movie than television? Because at the time, movies wouldn't just appear on television a couple weeks or months after release like they do today. Star Wars aired on television for the first time in 1984, 7 years after its initial release. And the VHS didn't release until 1982, so the theater was the place if you wanted to watch this film. So in between Star Wars and Empire, he decided to give the television audience a taste of his movie through the very popular variety shows. Back in the 70s, the 3 big television networks were CBS, ABC, and NBC. And like anyone would, Lucas thought, let's put Star Wars out in front of all 3 audiences. That would be more than 90% of the national primetime television audience, which, speaking of, only like 5% of the people that watched the last video were actually subscribed. That's so little. Go down and hit that subscribe button right now, and I'll train you in the ways of being a Jedi so you have enough foresight to never have to watch the holiday special again, saving you so many brain cells. I'm gonna be here each week making more fun Star Wars videos that you're not going to want to miss, so make sure you've got that notification bell on. Now, in September, 2 different shows aired Star Wars specials fully equipped with movie props, costumes, and actors, and the biggest thing of all, the green light from Lucas himself. It seems like the fear of people forgetting about his Star Wars made him do something he would almost never do again. Lucas has always been so careful of his IP being extremely selective of how it gets used and who can use it, but not this time. The first time he willingly gave his characters to someone else to use was different. The first appearance was a comedy skit on the premiere of The Richard Pryor Show that featured all of the Cantina aliens in full movie costumes. This actually turned out to work great as a little comedy crossover. You see Pryor himself interacting with all these Star Wars aliens, making jokes and bartending alongside Atals, which is really cool. You can still go watch it for yourself on YouTube, it's pretty funny. With this segment, Lucas was able to target the NBC TV audience and get them excited enough to run back to the theater to re-watch Star Wars. And then the next appearance was the same month on the Donnie and Marie Show. This was more of a family-friendly show that aired on ABC, and Lucas specifically wanted to target that demographic of viewers, so not only did he send them a bunch of Stormtrooper costumes, but also R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader, and Chewbacca. This was a full 10-minute segment of singing and dancing, which is not something you would expect to see in this universe. It was a very cheesy, lighthearted performance, nothing serious, but you know what? It worked! It made all the families watching this finale run back to the theaters and rewatch Star Wars. It's like that one meeting Lucas had put him on this spiral of trying to put as much Star Wars as he could out into the world so people wouldn't forget about it, when in reality, it shot up in popularity on such a large scale that they probably would have still had fans ready to watch Empire 3 years later. But George was still worried, and since late night shows and variety television was all the craze of the 70s, what better way to keep up appearances and keep the fans excited than to do his very own full-length feature holiday special. And it was actually CBS, the last television network, who approached Lucas wanting to do this holiday special. And he said that back then, the time between Star Wars and Empire, there was so much pressure to keep the fans still engaged and excited because the executives in Hollywood thought everyone would forget about it. So the answer for him was to make some kind of short-form Star Wars content. But back then, it was impossible to make something like Star Wars on the budget of one of these television shows. And so that's where the holiday special fits in. And the goal for this project was to create Star Wars' very own iconic special that you would typically see shows put on around the holidays as a fun, easy, quick way to make an extra little taste of Star Wars for the fans and sell some toys to the kids. And due to their contracts, the main cast had to star in it. As much as each and every one of them clearly did not want to participate, they were held at blaster point. They had to make this special. There was no way around it. And it started out fairly normal. George Lucas was there to give birth to this idea and help guide it to the point where someone else would be able to take it over while he started working on Empire. But unfortunately, things didn't go so smoothly. It actually probably took the worst turn imaginable and came out as bad as it possibly could. Merging something as theatrical as Star Wars with 70s variety TV was way harder than expected for more reasons than one. Not only were they the complete opposite of each other, but the people creating it had no idea how to do movies, and sci-fi ones at that, and were used to only working on television. That was their specialty. That's why Mark Hamill's face is caked on with the thickest layers of makeup. It's because that's just how they used to do it for TV. The budget ran out before they had any sort of set built for the finale, so it just looks like there's this cult of Wookiees about to ascend into a different realm. That's what you get with no set. You get one guy running around Hollywood buying every candle in the county and a smoke machine. Honestly, even a movie would be a struggle to produce 43 full-body Wookiee outfits. The robes on the Wookiees, as cursed as they are, make sense from a production standpoint that needs a quick turnaround time on a project like this. But the writers who actually wrote the holiday specials, they didn't write sci-fi. Ever. They wrote all the other variety shows that were airing on TV. They wrote musical numbers, so they had no idea what to do with these Star Wars characters and the Star Wars lore and the universe that is Star Wars. Some people wondered if all the writers had even watched the movie before they wrote this. And when you have all these variety show writers writing Star Wars for the first time, it's not going to be good. Lucas originally had picked his personal friend David Akumba to direct the special. They went to film school together, and Akumba had gone off and directed rock and roll videos. And after seeing who the list of writers were that were attached to this project, he immediately thought it was a bad idea to have all these musical television people trying to create this piece of work that is so different from what they're used to making. This was the beginning of some very big creative differences that would snowball into the downfall of the holiday special. And while they got access to not only all the characters and costumes and George Lucas IP, they also got to use the full cast. All the main cast was at their disposal, but unfortunately the writers felt the need to expand the cast with more talent that was more familiar to the traditional television audience. This included Bea Arthur from The Golden Girls that plays the bartender in the cantina. She was in multiple popular sitcoms in the 70s, and then Harvey Korman, another legend from television, playing the role of not one, but 3 different characters in the special. And then possibly the biggest addition, they also brought in the extremely well-known Art Carney to have the only source of dialogue around the Wookiee family. And like I said, all of these were well-known actors, but for television, and more specifically for the older audience. This just solidified even more this piece of Star Wars being so out of touch and far from the original movie. Not only did you have these writers from a different industry creating it, but they also brought their actors in that type of comedy into the special, which quite frankly just doesn't work in this space. Originally, George Lucas wrote an hour-long rough draft of the holiday special, and this version of it is completely different than how it ended up.
There you go. A first draft. Official first draft.
As CBS realized that the craze for Star Wars was not dying down and people were still flooding to the movies to rewatch it, they wanted it to become a 90-minute special and then eventually a 2-hour-long special. Thankfully, in the end, it was just an hour and 37 and not a minute more. Lucas met with all of the writers and spent 12 hours with them, laying everything out, explaining the story, explaining the lore, explaining the characters. He tried to give them as much as he physically could before trusting them to take his baby and turn it into a Christmas musical. And after that, he disappeared, lost to the abyss to start working on The Empire Strikes Back. And while they did the best they could without him, most times their efforts were pointed in the wrong direction. Production ended up being a complete mess. In the cantina scene alone, they didn't have proper ventilation in any of the costumes, and the temperature on set was so high from all the equipment, people, lights. It was so hot, and the hours were extremely long on this shoot. Some say they were there for 24 hours straight, and the actors in these costumes started passing out from lack of oxygen and heat exhaustion. But honestly, it's crazy the amount of aliens from the original that made it into this, and while you would think that this is the same guy from the original movie that picks a fight with Luke, and that this is Greedo from the film, and that this is Hammerhead from the original, we're all wrong. These are all completely different characters from the ones in the movie. Yup, since this is Star Wars canon at the time, Greedo is dead. Han shot him a year ago, so this is just another random Rhodian dressed exactly like Greedo. And this is not the same alien from the cantina. This is the exact same alien, except this one has hooves for hands instead of fingers. Therefore, this is a completely different character. They literally just used all the same costumes they could. Some of the aliens are the same characters from the movie, but in the end, I feel like the continuity was the last thing on their minds while making this. They shot this scene over and over and over and over again, so many times. And I don't know what they were waiting for. Who knows if they ever got the perfect take, because this is what we got anyways. For the act with the band, they brought them in and just let them loose in the costume room and told them to go pick out their own costumes. Mix and match until you seem like you're not from this world. Literally like a child on Spirit Day. Put 6 shirts on, put pants on your head. I don't know if it was a lack of care or creativity, or they just had no idea or forethought to create new unique costumes that weren't already in the universe. You slap some cheesy effects on it and boom, we're done. Moving on to the next act. And it just felt like there was no direction, and all the pieces of this puzzle, all the people that kept getting involved, assumed that everyone else, the people who already had been working on it, knew what they were doing. And it turns out that nobody did. The first 3 days of shooting, they blew through the majority of their $1 million budget. Because they spent so much longer on set than they should have, the overtime killed their funds. And those 3 days were anything but easy. And because of the massive train wreck it already was, David Akumba, the director, stepped away from the project. There was too many people who didn't know what they were doing trying to do this thing their way, and it very quickly became the impossible. Production freaked out and became worried that they were spending way more than they were supposed to, which brought everything to a halt. Steve Binder was called in to fill Akumba's shoes as the new director, who had a lot of previous success directing variety TV specials. And when they reached out and called him, they weren't even sure that the project could be finished. They were so close to pulling the plug entirely. Unfortunately for Lucas, that didn't happen. Binder knew what he was doing enough to be able to recover the train wreck and push it towards the finish line. Originally, Lucas wanted to start the sequel to Star Wars on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk and give us a closer look at what their life was like. But instead, the story got ported to the holiday special. The only problem is that Wookiees don't speak English. You can only do so much filming a group of Wookiees for 40 minutes. Yeah, they bring in some humans finally to give us some audible dialogue, but almost half of this 97-minute special is filled with grunts, groans, roars, and growls that have no meaning. There's actually fan-created subtitles for the Wookiees so you can understand their dialogue, I guess you can call it, and it makes it bearable. But originally, they just used the guest stars to translate what the Wookiees were saying. They'd call Luke up and have a conversation. Oh, who's that? Princess Leia. Thank goodness. A little more human interaction. Art Carney comes in and brings his style of old school humor into this world and makes you realize the creators had no idea what Star Wars should be. Even Han Solo, when he eventually gets there, feels like they wrote him weird. But Art Carney's character brings gifts for the Wookiee family and gives Chewbacca's dad a VR headset that's supposed to bring to life your fantasies. The only problem with that is Grandpa's got a dirty mind. They segue into another act, another song, but there's clearly some palpable tension going on between Grandpa and this woman he's been fantasizing about. It just takes a really weird turn. Star Wars was for kids, it had a large child audience, and they decided that this was a good use of 7 full minutes of screen time. Who asked to see what Grandpa's thinking about when nobody's looking? I feel like this was one of the worst segments into an act they could have possibly made, but you know what? They did it. It aired and it's canon now. This is part of Star Wars forever, and it feels wrong in so many ways. Now, thankfully, I think the one redeeming quality of the holiday special is the introduction of Boba Fett. After Star Wars came out, Lucas couldn't stop thinking about this character and what was to come of him. Originally, this was going to be a super commando, a specialized, more advanced type of stormtrooper he wanted to put in The Empire Strikes Back. And then he eventually became the bounty hunter we know him as today. David Akumba suggested the Canadian animation studio Nelvana to Lucas, and they got them to create this 10-minute trippy cartoon we segue into, which is by far the best part of the entire special. And they get the actual cast to do the voice acting, which is so awesome. Even James Earl Jones does the voice for Darth Vader here.
I see why they call you the best bounty hunter in the galaxy.
Oh no, what will we do now?
I would have been so disappointed if I was a kid watching this for the first time and then they never made more of it. Eventually, Nelvana did the droid show as well as the Ewok show, so we did get a little more trippy Star Wars cartoons, but just no more of the full original cast. This short cartoon was written by Lucas himself, and it follows Luke and the droids tracking down Han and Chewie since they've been missing for a while, and who shows up to help Luke? None other than Boba Fett himself. It is so cool to see this studio, who just finished doing a couple animated Christmas specials, animate some blaster fights and explosions and galactic monsters and bounty hunters. It was such a cool first little taste of Boba Fett. This is what started the craze and spawned the Boba Fett action figures everyone had to have. Then, unfortunately, we're brought back to the rest of the special just in time for the finale, where they get the main cast on set for the day and 43 Wookiees. And you might notice that these are some of the thinnest Wookiees you have ever seen, and you're not wrong. By the time they were shooting the finale, the budget was entirely gone, a long time ago, and they just had an empty aircraft hangar with a bunch of store-bought candles and a couple fog machines working overtime. And to save money, they only made the Wookiees' heads. No bodysuits, that's why they seem so thin. From the neck down, they're just humans. It's honestly a wonder none of these long robes ever caught on fire with all the candles around set. And then here, more than ever, the editing is so weird, with random fade-ins to the actors who had no idea a camera was on them, making it seem like they have no idea why they're here or what they're doing. They do a whole recap flashback scene from the movie, and everything is edited so awkwardly. And this is because, once they finished shooting, the entirety of the editing fell onto the two leaders who were variety show producers. Neither of them had edited anything ever up until now, and that's part of why this came out so weird. But you know what? I think the weirdest thing, that is, if you were a kid watching this, like a young kid, I've heard that they loved it. Because as Star Wars fans, the movie is all you had until this point. I mean, even the first Christmas, there were no Star Wars toys because they weren't prepared for the mass pandemonium the movie created. And so if you were this little kid, you didn't care how silly or weird the Wookiees grunting for half an hour was. Sure, the grandpa segment might have been weird, but you got to see stormtroopers and Han Solo again and Luke Skywalker. And the kids, I hear, actually liked it. And I'm genuinely curious, if you watched the holiday special when it first aired or even shortly after, please go to the comments and tell me your story of watching it or finding it after the fact. I would genuinely love to hear it. I've read stories about some that never knew about it, and some that thought it was merely a legend that they heard whispers of at school. And I heard those that grew up watching it as a kid and really enjoyed it. I heard some stories of people going to great lengths to try to get their hands on a copy. If you want to share, me and I'm sure a lot of other fans would love to hear it. The holiday special is the weirdest thing that Lucas has completely disowned and actively tried to get stomped out of existence. Watching it truly feels like we're seeing something we aren't supposed to, but now parts of it are openly embraced. Life Day is celebrated by fans in the parks, there's action figures of it. Jon Favreau brought Boba Fett's special rifle to life from the cartoon by giving it to Mando. The Christmas special has been woven into the culture whether Lucas wanted it to be or not. I mean, this was his idea, and the whole idea was to keep fans still excited about Star Wars until Empire. It was to sell toys to little kids on Christmas. Did it accomplish its goal? Did it even contribute to the excitement? Much more people have seen it now than ever before, and I think even if it accomplished something so different from originally intended, it's pretty interesting how much it's added to the world of Star Wars. Because it's our ugly duckling to watch as a meme with friends or to put on at the end of a party to get people to leave. We will continue to get even more Easter eggs as Star Wars lives on, and it will always be the one thing that Lucas regrets most. Let me know what you think of the holiday special in the comments and send this to your Star Wars friends. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, remember, the Force will be with you always.